Beautiful April in Austin. We get a lot of rain and the berries are falling. Mockingbirds singing an April Fool's song. Ain't nothing that can't be resolved. Indian paintbrush waving the wind, while a hawk overhead does a dive and a spin, helping old turtle across an old highway into the blue bonnets and safety again. April in Austin, the tower bells ring, but the students are drifting across Barton Springs. A lazy old Easter of sunshine and showers, gathering ladybirds, native wildflowers. Beautiful sunset in the hill country, follow a rainbow over enchanted rock. Take a long weekend from Thursday to Monday, find the lost maples and go for a walk. April in Austin, the tower bells ring, but the natives are restless to float Barton Springs. It's the last nip of winter, the warming is starting, watching the nest of the first purple martin. Beautiful April in Austin. We get a lot of rain and the berries are falling. Mockingbirds singing an April Fool's song. Ain't nothing that can't be resolved.
My name is Clark Hancock. I'm the head of the Save Barton Creek Association, and we really want to thank Roger for setting this up for us, because the stories that you're going to hear today are stories that are extremely important to where we're headed, because it tells us where we've been. 30 years ago, the population in Austin was less than half of what it is now. Let that sink in for a minute. Less than half of what it is now. All the development that we see in West Austin and Southwest Austin, it wasn't there. In fact, that was almost considered undevelopable land. But then one thing led to another, and that became very desirable development areas. And we started to see pressures on the natural environment from those development interests. And so the big question came up is, what are the guidelines that are going to be necessary for us to effectively be able to expand the way Austin was expanding, and at the same time protect what makes Austin so special? And underneath it all is this, something I'm sure you guys are all very aware of. Karst feature limestone underlies this whole area. And because of it, we have a hydrological system that is not necessarily unique to this area, but defines this area. But it's out of sight. We don't see this. And before 30 years ago, our understanding of that was very limited. As the development pressure started moving into these areas, the big question came up is, what would those human activities do to this underground system that is the fundamental factor to what makes Austin so special? So today, we're going to have a chance to listen to some of the stories on how that understanding of the uniqueness of this area how that got transferred into public policy and the policies that have affected the way Austin has grown since then. 500,000 people in Austin 30 years ago, close to 2 million now, and it's still growing. So it isn't a question of history, of what happened in the past. It is a question of what do we do now to prepare for the future. So to get us going, I'm going to introduce our moderator. And Matt Curtis has been working in public policy in the city of Austin for decades. He grew up here, moved here when he was 8 years old. And recently he's developed, since, 2017, that she's developed the Smart City Policy project. And that is a project that is looking at how to integrate the new economy into city government. All the wonderful entrepreneurial spirit that we find here in Austin, but actually bring it into the public sector as well. So Matt, I'm going to turn it over to you, and I'm going to ask our panel members to come on up. Matt, thank you all for being here. And if you could introduce the panel, that would be great.
Yeah, this is great. All right, thanks so much, everybody, and thank you, Clark. This is terrific. Everybody's going to grab a seat, and I'll get up there in just a second. On the Zoom, you guys will see here comes Jeff Travillion, one of our county commissioners, handsome, out visiting colleges, I believe. My name is Matt Curtis. I work with Smart City Policy Group. And oddly enough, a lot of us are all old friends, but you guys will hear me make some jokes and try to keep this lighthearted because this should be fun, right? We're going to have a fun discussion. We're going to be together for a while, so let's settle in and try to make this a fun, interesting time. You hear me make some lighthearted jokes along the way, and when you have a bunch of friends together, we tend to keep it lighthearted. So get casual and be lighthearted yourself if you see any jokes along the way.
I hope they're good jokes.
Yeah, and Jeff Travillion made a bet that I wouldn't dominate the microphone, and I shouldn't, because these are the folks that you really want to hear from. I'm just here to moderate and help facilitate some discussion. But to let us get to know who you all are, who's here from out of state? Anybody? Who's here from out of Austin? Hands? So you guys are all from Texas, but outside of the city of Austin. Who thinks they're from the farthest away from Austin? Did I use farthest correctly? It's not furthest, farthest. Who's from the farthest outside of Austin? Anybody from Titus County or Morris County? That'd be pretty far. Who thinks they're from the farthest away? Just take a shot. We just want to see how far somebody came. Yes, sir. From Tyler, Texas? Yeah. That's Wood County? Smith County. Oh, how could I forget? Wood County's next door, right? Well, it's beautiful part of the world, but a very different, right? Very different geographic and kind of ecological setting compared to Austin. And I heard you guys went to Barton Springs. You did do that. Did anybody notice it was cold? It's a nice place to chill in the summer. It's a nice place to go swim. And I heard a couple people mention the community and the friends and the people. One of my favorite stories of all of us is we have a guy that's in our space, kind of working around local policy and that sort of thing. Scott Johnson. And so he found out when I was working for one of the two mayors I was working for that I would go swim on Wednesdays at 9 p.m. And I said, man, I just can't go to some event. I swim at 9 p.m. So I'm swimming out in the middle of Barton Springs. It is a very communal activity out there. And would you know, I heard somebody yell, Matt, Matt, Matt. And it was Scott Johnson coming out and started talking to me about electric lawnmowers he was trying to press. Well, guys, we've got a great group here with you today, and we're going to make this fun. I'm going to start in an interesting order, because I'm not going to go in order of how everybody's seated. I'm going to start with our County Commissioner, Brigid Shea. So, Brigid, I'm going to let you answer and kind of talk a little bit about yourself in our introductions. But Brigid Shea is one of our county commissioners now, but she was on our city council for the city of Austin. Before that, she was an environmental activist, an environmental icon, really, helping to fight for this SOS effort here in Austin and so many different environmental policies that have made the city of Austin the great place that it is now. And now Brigid gets to serve on the Travis County Commissioners Court, helping us every day with our efforts at that level. So remind me real quick, what year did you first come to Austin?
I moved here in 1988, and I came here because of Dr. James Hansen's testimony to Congress. Anybody here know who Dr. James Hansen is? Y'all should know that as students of earth science. He was the head of the Goddard Space Institute at NASA, and their job was to study planetary impacts. And they were the first group of scientists that really brought to the public attention the impact of the burning of fossil fuels, which was creating a blanket around the planet and would cause it to heat to the point where human life was no longer viable. And his testimony to Congress was a giant wake-up call for me and for a lot of other people. It was a front-page story in the New York Times, and I was working as a national press secretary in Washington at the time. I'd been a reporter with NPR stations in Minnesota and Philadelphia. And I read that story, and I put the paper down and called other friends in Washington and said, we all have to drop what we're doing right now, or we can measure our coffins and get in. And who's doing this kind of work, because that's what I want to focus on. And I heard from several people about a national environmental organization that was starting a chapter in Texas, and they were hiring. It was called Clean Water Action. And they do very good policy research, and they organize their members to get involved in elections. And I just said, sign me up. Never been to Texas before, but that's what I want to do. And I literally came to Texas sight unseen. And my friends in Washington thought I'd lost my mind. They all said, those people have guns, it's dangerous. Anyway, so.
You think they were right now, looking back?
Yeah, they were right. Anyway, so I came here in 1988 to work on climate issues and have been kind of tacking back and forth ever since. But Clark was right when he set up this introduction to put together the science and the policy, and that's the experience that we've all had, is working on the policy to protect the environment, and it's really an incredible story. The passage of SOS, which happened 30 years ago this month, August 8th, 1992, is Austin's great David and Goliath story. Everybody who comes here should know it. Everyone who comes to Barton Springs should know it. Because the passage of that law, I believe, is the reason that we can still swim in Barton Springs today. So we've got great stories. It's an incredible drama. It's very instructive, and I'm really excited to have this opportunity to tell you that and to hopefully pass along some really important historical lessons about what it takes to protect the environment and to protect beautiful, rare places like Barton Springs.
And you guys know, here you have a great panel of folks who've been working on this for a long time. We may actually miss a tale or something you might want to ask about. We're going to save a lot of time for questions, so be thinking of your questions. Make sure to scribble them down. We're going to save a block of time at the end of this to answer those questions. Thanks, Brigid. We appreciate it. On the Zoom, we have another county commissioner, Jeff Travillion, and his backstory is really fascinating because he brought a story that I think we're going to tell more as we go through the next hour with you guys, but the story of how he got involved with the SOS effort, an environmental policy effort. Jeff Travillion's been serving on the, how long have you been serving on the County Commissioner's Court, Jeff?
Since 2017.
And then just because that job is super busy and doesn't pay well enough and keeps you hopping all the time, Jeff decided with his extra hours he would go become the chair of our transit authority, Capital Metro, which is our public transportation service. And I think you've been the chair now at least a year, haven't you, Jeff?
Almost a year, not quite.
And when he
we're working on it.
When he first started with both jobs, he had a full head of dark hair.
We all did.
Didn't have a beard, and the beard that he did have was dark. But Jeff actually works really hard and tells a great story. Jeff, give us, we're going to get in later about how you got involved during the SOS effort and in the environmental policy in the 1990s, but talk to us a little bit about what you might be doing now in the County Commissioner's Court on this issue. Are you continuing to kind of keep an eye on environmental policy issues? That was good. I'll tell you, the answer was yes.
And I can vouch for that as well.
And he was the one who said I was going to be long-winded. And so then to just work in order up here, we have one of our former city council members who's been working on environmental issues for a really long time, and frankly a heck of a whole lot of fun. His name is Daryl Slusher, and he's working right next to me. Daryl, I feel like, were you a journalist back in 1990, 1991?
Yes, I worked at thank you, Matt. I was the politics editor and columnist, investigative reporter for the weekly Austin Chronicle, and we sort of sounded the alarm on this. There were other people doing, but that this company, Freeport-McMoRan, owned the biggest gold mine in the world. In Indonesia, they were headed by a former UT lineman, football player, and they were wanted to build this massive development 7 miles upstream on Barton Creek, and so we sounded the alarm about that and helped set off what turned out to be an all-night public hearing where 900 people signed up to speak, and it went from one vote against called the PUD, Plan Unit Development, Barton Creek PUD, went from thought one person was going to vote, one person had said they were leaning against it, and it ended up being 7-0 against it. And we'll probably talk more about that. There was a lot of pretty entertaining evening there that really reflected Austin and reflected some of the threats to Austin.
And then, so for those of you from Austin know the Austin Chronicle, other folks here, weekly journalistic outlet that has, would you call it long form writing? But longer than normal.
Well, mine was long.
But always entertaining.
Yeah,
Jeff
thank
is
you.
back.
But terrific. Oh, great. Jeff, I'm going to come right back to you in a second. For those of you guys who have a chance, pick up the Chronicle and you'll see, but in the days of when Daryl was there, terrific, longer, I would call it longer than normal articles, but really in-depth, concentrative investigative reporting and writing on different issues and policy issues. And for those of us at City Hall for a long time, we would view it as the paper, and it kept us in check. It was great to have the Fourth Estate there, really, I guess, keeping us in check.
And you're still writing. What's your publication
Oh,
called?
that's right.
Can people sign
Austin
up?
Independent, yeah, austinindependent.org. Taking a little break right now.
But people can sign up to receive kind of regular, so austinindependent.org. How long, when are you back from break?
Right after Labor Day.
Great, I like the way you think. Okay, and then environmental icon, former executive director, then he retired, then he went back to become the executive director, and then he retired, and then he went back to being the executive director of the Hill Country Conservancy. His name is George Cofer. You might have thought it was Sam Elliott, the actor, but it's actually a George Cofer. George, what were you doing in the early 90s? How did you get involved with this?
First of all, thank y'all for this opportunity. This is great. It is so nice to be in a room full of people who understand way more than I do now, and certainly more than I did in the 1990s about the hydrogeological system, and karst was a new word to me. So I'm from Austin, went to the university, as I like to say. Y'all throw rocks at me, the university. And pretty much, just a slacker. Austin's famous for slackers. And I grew up, I could be in the pool in 10 minutes from our home. And so I asked a friend of mine who, Shooty Fath, another famous icon here, 106 years old, doing well, thank you.
Amazing.
I said, Shooty, what's this civic stuff you do? And she shook her head like, you poor boy. A dear friend and mentor, she took me to a Save Barton Creek Association meeting where I learned that there was a debate about whether or not land use would impact the quantity and quality of the water coming out of Barton Springs, the fourth largest springs in Texas. And I said, what do you mean there's a debate? And people at Save Barton Creek Association, who'd been involved much longer than I was the new kid, said, yeah, they're developers who are saying that they can clean the runoff, stormwater runoff, to the point that it's cleaner than God made it. And this really pissed me off. And so I closed my cabinet shop and overnight became an environmental activist and went to work for Save Barton Creek Association. I thought my wife might leave me. Had a pretty good cabinet shop and then was a volunteer, but it all worked out fine. I worked there for 10 years and then went on to land conservation. I want to share one more quick observation. To go back before SOS. And so SOS, 1990, we'll talk more about that. Save Barton Creek Association, 1979. Before that, and I'm sorry, I don't know the year, I should, late 60s, early 70s, the Zilker Park Posse. Now, one reason the Zilker Park Posse started, that was the first organized group that I know about around protecting Barton Springs. And even if you don't know where this shopping mall is, I'll try and make this very succinct and then give the mic back to Matt. A mile down Mopac, big shopping center, Barton Creek Mall. That was a hill where we would all go sit as kids and drink beer and look at the lights in the city. All few 100,000 of them, as Clark said. They took the top of that hill off to build Barton Creek Mall, and within 30 minutes, Barton Springs pool turned so cloudy that it had to be closed for safety reasons. You couldn't see. It became white opaque. I had no idea what those conduits were in the aquifer. The activists were not schooled. Thankfully, the U.S. Geological Survey and Raymond Slade, we'll hear more about that, and we begin to learn. My point being that it took us a while to understand the science. All we knew was that it was pretty clear to us that building shopping malls in the heart of the recharge zone was not a great idea. So I'll get off my soapbox now.
Yeah, but I mean, that's important, right? And brings up a key point of what we're going to make sure to speak about today, which is how we use the science to advocate and influence decision making. So often I think that elected officials are struggling. Somebody had mentioned to me the other day that on an average city council agenda, you might have about 190 agenda items on a given week, and it's difficult for a city council member to fully understand everything. I think equal on a county commission agenda. They get very filled, and there's a lot of information to process. Jeff, of course, added taking on Capital Metro on top of all his other work, so he has even more, and it gets difficult. So being able to help elected officials and decision makers make decisions by providing data and providing a science argument, science-based argument, certainly is very helpful. We do have Jeff back for a moment, and just Jeff, I wanted to make sure, instead of just joking about our introductions and everything and commenting about how hard you're working every day, can you tell us a little bit about what you were doing in the 90s and maybe
Certainly. Certainly, action is better than the first one, so I'm happy that we've gotten back together. I appreciate the opportunity to talk with such an illustrious group. A lot of the folks on that stage have been my friends for over a quarter of a century. Appreciate the work that has been done. I came to Austin in 1985 to go to graduate school. And as I was a student at the LBJ School of Public Affairs, I started an internship with the Texas General Land Office, which in many ways serves as the Department of Interior for the state of Texas. We were involved in a number of environmental initiatives. It has been something that has always been interesting to me because particularly having grown up in Mississippi, when we talk about conservation, conservation is a way of life for poor people. You have to preserve and protect everything that you have access to. So being a part of the environmental movement almost came naturally to me. But when you look at Austin's particular case, when you look at the way that the minority community was impacted by public policy, what you find is that the African-American community, and in many ways the Hispanic community as well, was shipped into a part of the city in 1928 where you found a vast majority of the landfills, a vast majority of industrial activity. Many of the things that are not safe to live near, you can find right in the poor part of town. So, one of the other pieces to the puzzle is Back then, when you look at what was going on with SOS versus what was being done by Freeport-McMoRan. Freeport-McMoRan had found a way to reach into the African American community by working through the political class. Because you had a series of lobbyist interactions, because you had people who were connected to the community, or people who were representing the community in government, it was easier for Freeport-McMoRan to build a communications mechanism with the community than it was for the community organically to be involved in an environmental movement, if you will. What we tried to do was through the NAACP, which historically has been involved in protecting minority communities. The president and CEO of the NAACP at the time the ordinance was passed was a guy named Ben Chavis. Ben Chavis coined the phrase environmental racism and talked about how if we were not careful, those entities, those businesses that were supposed to be coming into communities and helping build opportunity, particularly economic opportunity, we wanted to make sure that while they built that economic opportunity, that they did not expose communities, minority communities, poor communities in particular, to the things that could make them unhealthy and unsafe. So it was our interest at the NAACP to make sure that we were involved in educating the community, to make sure that the community knew what was around it and how it could be a part of a movement to make sure that it would be protected, and that we would continue to do things that were safe, that we would impact public policy to help communities and make sure that not only were they included from the standpoint of having access to job opportunities, but that those job opportunities would not be managed in a way that would be harmful to the neighborhoods that they lived in. So it was important for us to do a couple of things, and we wanted to make sure that the African American community, like other communities, really had access to the environmental communities, the training that was available because of it, the opportunity to work in the industries that would allow us to better protect and understand the forces around us.
And that story is remarkable. We'll talk a little bit more about that, but it really is something to earmark, because I think as we talk about how you get different community groups together, inform them, educate them, and use them in the advocacy role, getting Jeff and the NAACP and the communities that he was able to help bring into that advocacy position is a very important one. We'll talk more about that. I'm the last one. How would a guy who's, I think, 20 in 1991, I guess I was 21, 19. How was I involved? Believe it or not, this is a crazy story I haven't told anybody, and I've been waiting to tell them this all this time. But there was a really cool restaurant called Les Amis that a bunch of kind of slackers would go hang out at, and every now and then they do funny things like try to do an all-night thing for a while. And it was during that period, my memory is it was during that period they were staying open all night long, or maybe until 4. They had a thing called the Peasant's Plate, and it cost $2.78, and that's why I went down there and hung out, because I could afford it. And I was sitting in there one night when somebody came in and yelled to the entire crowd. There was an all-night meeting going on at City Hall, and we need people to get down there and sign up and speak. And that's how I wound up getting involved in this effort. And I've never told you that.
That is a great story.
I've been holding on to that for a while now, which doesn't come easy to me. So I did go down there not knowing anybody, and sat there and watched things for a couple hours until I thought my dad would wonder where his car was and drove home. Okay, well, let's go through this. Let's set the table really quickly and talk about just a quick snapshot, because we've kind of included in some of the storytelling what was the conflict. But I think between you, the journalist working on it, and you, the advocate who come down to work on this issue, give us a quick just rundown of what exactly was the thing that popped up. We've mentioned Freeport-McMoRan and how all this came to be so quickly.
I'll jump in there first. Well, So there had been a struggle since at least the 70s to try to protect Barton Creek in Austin, and some of the green belt had been purchased already and that kind of thing. There's a big boom during the early through the mid 80s, and then collapse, savings and loan crisis, all that stuff, reckless funding of development, that kind of collapsed, and so the economy sort of went into a tailspin because it was based too much on real estate speculation, let's say. But then in 1990, I think it was actually 89 when they got started, but in 1990, this development proposal I was talking about earlier came forward, the Barton Creek PUD. That's what set off the hearing Matt was talking about a minute ago that I think we've all mentioned to some extent. That was June 7th, 1990. And then, so that shot down the PUD, but that set in this long process of them trying to get the legislature to do their work for them and take power away, try to take power away from the city of Austin, that kind of thing. And then the city council didn't respond with they put in a strong ordinance at first, and then they weakened it. And that set off the Save Our Springs Alliance petition drive, which Brigid headed, was spokesperson for, did an incredible historic job on that. And what that was to put an ordinance in place governing development in the Barton Springs zone. Although that was the important caveat, the Barton Springs zone within the city of Austin's jurisdiction, because that's really only about a third of the Barton Springs zone. So there's an ongoing threat to it from the sprawl and unchecked development, sewage discharge outside the city's jurisdiction. But ever since August 8th, 1992, that Save Our Springs ordinance has been in place for development over the aquifer. We had to negotiate some settlements with people who had grandfather protection from the state legislature. So that's sort of the chronology for all this, how this happened.
And the context for why I said this is Austin's great David and Goliath story, Freeport-McMoRan, which I'm sure many of you know, if you're in the geological sciences, how many people know who Freeport-McMoRan is? You know, they're like a massive company. And at the time, they were listed on the toxic inventory list as the largest polluter in the United States. And they were the company behind the Barton Creek PUD. And they'd come to town and said, we can do this massive development. They were proposing a city the size of Waco in the Barton Springs watershed, upstream from Barton Springs along Barton Creek. And it won't pollute the springs. We know how to do this. And everybody had the memory of when the developers of the Barton Creek Mall said the same thing. Yeah, we could shave off this hilltop and build this massive shopping mall, and it won't pollute the springs. And everyone saw that it did. When I first came to town in 1988, one of the first things I did was I went to Barton Springs because people had told me you've got to make a pilgrimage there. And for me, it's a bit of a sacred site. But the second thing I heard was, don't shop at Barton Creek Mall. Those SOBs polluted Barton Springs, lied to the community, and have really harmed our quality of life. And there's still people in town who will tell you they don't go to Barton Creek Mall for that reason. Exactly. So you had this history, and then you had this company that was listed as the largest polluter in the United States, Freeport-McMoRan, and they were making all kinds of claims that they could have this massive development in the watershed and it wouldn't affect the springs. And then you had what I consider to be sort of heroic scientists. Raymond Slade was at the top of that list, and I think this gathering is sort of, you know, in his name. He worked for the U.S. Geologic Society, and he was an expert on karst formations and spring hydrogeology. And he was the one who educated most of us about how that whole system worked and really how fragile it is and how easy it is for pollution to run off from development and get into the aquifer and pollute the springs and pollute our water. So you had this company that was, they literally owned the world's largest gold mine. It was as if Midas, King Midas was on one side, and then you had the everyday residents of Austin who loved Barton Springs, who wanted to protect it. And most of the people who were involved in this effort maybe had 2 nickels to rub together, and they're up against this guy who's literally sitting on top of the world's largest gold mine. Money was no object, and he was determined to get his way. There's a classic moment in the all-night hearing in June of 1990 where he's speaking to the council, trying to convince them to pass this weak ordinance and give them permission to do all this massive development in the watershed. And he's telling them his bona fides, and he's standing in front of the city council. You can see this on the video of that all-night hearing. And he says that, not only is he this captain of industry, et cetera, but when he played football at UT, he had the best grades of anyone at UT. And then he paused and said, on the football team. and he had paid all these people to sit in the council chambers and fill it up so that the rest of the ordinary residents of Austin couldn't get in there. We were all out in the street. I was among them. And his paid minions fell out of their seats laughing at him. And you can see this on the video. He grips the podium and looks around like, I'm going to show you. And he, in fact, said, I will make the budgets run with red ink, if you dare to try and stop me. He threatened everybody in Austin. So he was like not only King Midas, but he was like, the villainous Goliath. And everybody else in Austin that wanted to protect Barton Springs was like David, and we're like, well, okay, game on. And so it was this incredible, massive, titanic contest of wills. And the passage of SOS, after a year or more of debate and discussion, which was by citizen initiative, after Freeport spent, it had to be $10 to $15 million. I mean, they just poured money into this campaign. And I said to people at the time, I wasn't around for the French Resistance, but I kind of imagine this is how it went. Because people showed up at our office with documents, and they literally, I remember one person walked in and said, I don't know who you are, and you don't know who I am, but I found this on the copier at a law firm at work, and I thought you might be interested in seeing it. And it was their playbook. It was who they were going to raise money from and how much, and their whole campaign for fighting against SOS. We got a call from I got a call from a print shop, and a guy said, I'm on my break, I can't talk long, but Jim Bob, and that was the guy's name, Jim Bob Moffett. In fact, that became a new adjective for jerk in town. It was, don't be a Jim Bob. Anyway, this guy's on the phone, he says, I'm at the print shop, Jim Bob's printing this 4-color flyer, and here's what it says. And they felt like they couldn't trust people in Austin, so they went up to Dallas to film TV commercials, and we got copies of the TV commercials mailed to us from people in Dallas. So it was just, the ordinary people in Austin were enraged that this rich you-know-what was coming here and telling people, I'm going to crush you if you don't give me what I want. So it was a truly historic uprising of ordinary people in Austin who understood that Barton Springs was rare and precious and had to be protected. And we passed the strongest water quality ordinance in the nation by citizen initiative, I think, ever. I haven't heard of any other community that's done something like that equals what we did. And we based it on the science. We worked with people like Raymond Slade, who educated us and helped us understood, what level of impervious cover the watershed could withstand and still have relatively clean water running off from it. And that was what drove the writing of the SOS ordinance. And I have to give great credit to Bill Bunch, who's an environmental lawyer who still heads up the SOS effort for drafting the ordinance. And then we went out and got the signatures that were required to put it on the ballot. And the rest is literally history. But the reason that you can still go visit Barton Springs and hopefully swim there when it gets hotter today is because of that effort. If we hadn't passed the SOS law, I'm convinced we'd be looking at a mausoleum at Barton Springs and talking about how nice it was.
Oh, yeah. And I mean, I think you guys saw it, and you understand that we've had some of the most interesting characters that you can imagine. Who there's a lot about Austin. They might complain about the politics or whatever, and they'll go on about how much they love the Springs. I actually bumped into Ted Cruz at an event once, and he said, "I love Austin. I love the culture of Austin, and I love the environment of Austin. I love the Springs. I just can't stand your politics." And I had to hold my fists and bite my lip from saying it's because of the politics that maintains the culture and the environment in the Springs. Well, so you have groups that are paying for advocacy. You have groups that are paying to bring in what they want to call science or data. And so you have to be able to organize real science and real data, real information to be able to combat that, because you've got this paid advocacy effort.
We spoke about how someone who is so wealthy and someone who is so connected and powerful can come down and try to intimidate a community and say, you will do what I say or I will crush you. Now, but think about how the minority community, which was growing up around poverty, was impacted. Now, you're in a community that through the 1970s, if you worked for the school district, you could not be a member of the NAACP. You were characterized as being a part of a subversive organization and could therefore be fired just for having an NAACP card. Now you get a business that is a strong business that creates thousands of jobs. And now you have to ask yourself the question, if I am going to feed my family, do I have to do what they say, or will the environmental community and the folks who represent it help and protect me from this Goliath if they choose to persecute? Now, historically in the South, we have not only had to fear what business interests would do, but we've had to wonder whether we could coalesce with the community and have an opportunity to raise our families and raise our neighborhoods. This is the challenge that we continue to have. How do we work together in coalition? How do we understand each other's issues? And then, how do we create economic alternatives so that I don't have to work for Freeport McMoran or the 4 or 5 biggest economic interests in the community? What are we doing to build internships? What are we doing to build not only learning opportunities, but opportunities to work? A lot of folks in minority communities have been isolated in such a way that, look, you go with the first guy who tries to help you, and how much can you criticize someone who does that? Oftentimes, when we think about communities of poverty that are growing up around the poverty line, we don't think about all of the things that are necessary to make it possible for them to exist. And let me tell you what I mean by that. When we were moved to East Austin, there were 20 freedmen's colonies in Travis County before 1928. In 1928, most of these people were told by the sheriff and somebody in authority that you need to get out of here before the end of the day or something bad is going to happen to you. Now, you were moved into a community that had no grocery stores, that was redlined, that had no opportunity for you. So where do you develop the trust? How do you develop the relationships? The only folks that actually come across the tracks to talk to you are the business folks who will give you a job to do the things that they don't want to do. How is it that we, through a movement, build opportunity for everybody? If you remember, the University of Texas was not welcoming to the minority community during that period. If we have to make sure that at least our public institutions give us equal opportunity. We have to make sure that as we build our movements, that we build them not with transactions, but that we build them with a system so that we can all participate. If we don't build them as a system and don't say there is a real and viable alternative for you that will not require you to live in poverty, then if we don't do those things, then it's going to be hard to maintain the movements that are necessary to fight in an environment where Trumpism is creeping into our communities. It is only because we decide to work together and that we build the systems to work together that we're able to fight the intimidation of a Trump. Because if we look at it, Jim Bob Moffett was an early version of Trump here. Okay, I'm Baptist now. I can talk for a long time.
And Matt, I want to jump in on that real quick because Jeff was a real hero in the community, both for the African American community, but for the larger community, in that when he was head of NAACP and we were organizing to get community support for SOS, he looked at the science, he looked at the policy, and in the face of tremendous pressure from, again, the guy that owned the world's largest gold mine, this guy spread money everywhere. And there was tremendous pressure from the business community and other leaders in Jeff's community to not support SOS. But he still guided the organization and said, we look at the science, we look at the policy, and we decide on that, not on the politics. And they endorsed it. And there was a great political cost for Jeff from people who came after him as a result of that. So that's just a really important part of the story. I mean, y'all are looking at this from the science and the hydrogeology, but there's this whole layer of political policy making that's necessary to protect the environment. And we see it now with election deniers and climate deniers. There's a whole lot of people that are denying basic science or basic facts. And want to make policy based on, frankly, really bizarre ideas. So there's a lot of pressure on you all, and there will be in the future, around this whole issue. Do we follow the science, or do we follow weird political ideas that deny the science? And Jeff really played a crucial role there, and the story is not well known. So that's why this is a really important storytelling and documenting of the history of this effort.
I think getting back to the Jeff Travillion story, we'll dial that back in, but it is a really neat and heroic part of the story that I didn't know, and I was around during that time, and I don't know that everyone in Austin did know, but they should. I was going to mention for a second about that, the odd arguments that pop up, because it is part of that paid advocacy effort that people with a lot of money, deep pockets can pay for. There was an economic impact study that was conducted by Ray Perryman, and didn't that throw some chaff into the effort in an effort to sort of stop SOS in its tracks and get businesses to align against it?
Chaff is a kind word, Matt. Yeah. Bullshit comes to mind. It said that if the SOS ordinance were enacted, it would bankrupt the city of Austin. And that was the Chamber of Commerce's position. They went hard at it, front page headlines. Ordinance will bankrupt Austin. And thanks to Brigid's experience in organizing and Daryl's good reporting and the passion of the community, we had to understand the economics quickly. My memory is we had scientists on our side, we had all the community on our side, but economic analysis was not at that time what would you call it, a skill set of the Save Barton Springs movement. We learned quickly, and we began to refute that. But anyway, I guess my point is that, or Matt, to your point, to counterbalance that, we showed very successful, there were a very few, and it grew, but Austin business leaders for the environment, able. And there's a great photograph of business women and businessmen who were honest enough with themselves to get together and create Austin business leaders for the environment. And they all went down and stood in Barton Springs pool and took a big photo. And there were 10 or 20, and suddenly there were 100. So the business community, the Austin Independent Business Chamber, began to coalesce in addition to the environmental activists.
So
let me jump in on that.
Please.
It's just that, I mean, it's true that George is absolutely right about what that study said, and Jim Bob Moffett said he would bankrupt the city if it passed, and he said there would never be another Fortune 500 company move to Austin, and you look around and see if that came true. But I would say just even looking forward, when it's important to hear economic analysis, scientific analysis, but just sort of some common sense too. If you think you have the kind of treasure in a city that Barton Springs is, and that to protect that is going to bankrupt your city, that just doesn't make sense. And not only that, there was a plan in place, the Austin Tomorrow Plan, which citizens along with the city government put together in the late 70s, approved in 1979, and it called out how basically where we're sitting into the west is a karst aquifer, and then downstream is thicker soils and suitable for farming. You can see that if you look at, like, East Austin used to be a big spinach growing place. There's still some urban farms there. Walter Prescott Webb, the University of Texas professor, wrote a whole book on the Great Plains, how the 98th meridian, which runs just west of here, is the boundary between arable land or more than 30 inches of rain to the east, less than 30 inches to the west. So it's also a geological dividing line. So all those things came into play, but just you can protect your treasures without damaging your environment.
And I think this is really important, because it looks like a lot of you are students. How many of you are students here? So you're just, at the beginning of what will hopefully be your career in the geologic sciences. It's important to be true to yourselves and to your beliefs. And we had really singular leaders in the course of this SOS campaign who did that. Raymond Slade, who was a geologist, still with us but ill, was one of them. Another was the man who really helped take Michael Dell's brilliant idea and turn it into a hugely successful company, Dell Computers, Lee Walker. And he became a spokesperson for the SOS effort because he believed, and he did his homework, that protecting Barton Springs would be good for our economy. And he went on TV for our commercials and said that. And that was part of our response to Ray Perryman's paid study that reached this ridiculous conclusion that passing Barton Springs would ruin the economy. And I have a favorite memory of when he released his study. There was a big press conference at the Chamber of Commerce, and I was there along with a number of other people. And one of the SOS supporters dressed up in a giant chicken suit, and he was carrying a sign that said, "The sky is falling," signed C. Little. And he sat in the front row at this press conference. And Ray Perryman, pontificates about his study. And at the end of his comments, he opens it up for questions. And the giant chicken jumps up in the front row holding his sign and starts asking him questions. And Perryman answers. And
That's funny.
I'm a former reporter, right? I'm standing there just like, oh my God, I cannot believe this. It's my favorite, one of my favorite snapshot moments. And there's so many of them in the course of this campaign. But I don't know how many questions he answered from Chicken Little.
That's
but
funny.
It was a lot.
Do you guys remember who that was?
Eric Anderson.
Eric Anderson.
Well, I think you do have to give Perryman credit for answering the questions. He knew where he was. Hey, can I add one more thing?
Oh, yeah.
That also, and so Brigid was on the council like right before I came on. So you were what,
93 to 96.
93, 96, and I was 96, 2005. But during that time, we really empowered the scientific the scientific staff at the city, where they developed a really strong watershed protection department. Later on, when I worked at the Austin Water Utility, and I was on you can't talk about what happens in hiring panels, but I can tell you this: we were looking for the new director of watershed, and there's one of the national headhunter type guys, executives in there, and he said that nobody in the country had the kind of watershed protection department that Austin had. That's what the outside guy who works all around the country said. And so we were able to get people that really believed in the cause, but also were very scientifically sound. So that's what you do at the City of Austin. For this fair, you listen to what they're saying. You don't, and then you might have other things that factor into the decision, but you can count on that department. We need to always keep it that way, but you can count on sound science from them.
I think that it is important that as we establish a class of professionals that really understand what's going on around here and really understand what is at stake, we have to find a way to take that information and deliver it to communities that don't often have access to it. You would be amazed at the number of people who grew up in East Austin who have never been on the University of Texas's campus, never actually been 4 or 5 blocks over to see all of the different opportunities that the University of Texas provides. So where do we deliver information if people aren't going to the places where that information is developed and resides? It's a reason that the NAACP and folks like me have been pushing for years for after-school programming in our Title I schools. Our Title I schools are places where 60% or more of the kids there qualify for free and reduced lunch. We want to make sure that in those schools, and most of our Title I schools are in the east part of town, whether northeast or southeast. We need to make sure that we've got the resources so that there are paid tutors there helping kids, helping them with their homework, having opportunity for a third meal after school, but then what we call enrichment, which is being involved in organizations like the Girl Scouts, like the Boy Scouts, like Explorers, like any number of organizations that focus on getting kids outside, that focus on the environment, that create opportunities to work at places like our Natural Resources Division at the county, or Parks and Recreation over at the city. We have to make a concerted effort, and we have to make a consistent investment in making sure that we are giving the information out in communities that then will be energized to be involved not only in the environmental movement, but involved in protecting themselves, making sure that all of the landfills that are in that part of town have been identified and remediated if possible, to make sure that we are building an understanding of the types of professional opportunities that are available when you are aware of these things, and that the types of classes that you need to take. How important biology is, how important chemistry is. These are things that are learned behaviors in communities that grow up around poverty. I think that everybody feels that everybody knows what they know. Everybody's learned what they've learned. You're getting at every dinner table what every other dinner table is getting. And in many instances, that's just not true. When you have families who have the leaders of the family working in hourly jobs and sometimes working 2 jobs or 3 jobs, when is there an opportunity to talk about after-school programs or the environment or the types of jobs that you need to be training yourself for if you want to work in those areas? if when we were really serious in our communities about making sure that everybody has a similar understanding and knows what is at stake, when we can build that type of environment, I've seen it built before, but it does not happen organically. It happens because we decide to work together and build community learning opportunities that will ultimately lead to employment opportunities and will lead in a great deal of interest in our movement.
Absolutely.
That really does create that cycle that helps Austin and communities around the country, but I mean, especially Austin, stay special and become an economic driver. You know, Brigid and Daryl and George talked about Lee Walker getting involved in this. And did he get involved through ABLE, through the Austin Business Leaders?
No, he had seen some news stories about SOS, and I remember him calling and asking for a meeting so that he could learn more about it. And he's good friends with Lawrence Wright, who's a phenomenal writer, Pulitzer Prize-winning writer, and Steve Harrigan, similarly outstanding and recognized author. And I remember meeting with them at what was Good Eats over on Barton Springs Road. And I remember him saying, "I've got the religion, but I need the catechism on Barton Springs." And so it's such a classic line. The guy's brilliant. And when he learned, you know, that we'd worked with scientists, that we had studied what kinds of limits on impervious cover would be necessary to protect water quality, and understood the rigor that we brought to crafting the ordinance and the education and outreach that we were doing in the community, he basically just said, "Sign me up. You know, I'm there. I want to help protect Barton Springs. What can I do to help?" And he came on board as one of our primary speakers, and his comments in the television commercials that we created were incredibly powerful and persuasive, and they were such a stark contrast to Ray Perryman, who literally was an economist for sale. I mean, he'd write whatever you wanted for the highest bidder. So to contrast that with the person who built up Dell, which was, you know, idolized in the community, and having the head of Dell going on TV and saying protecting Barton Springs is good for our economy was really powerful and important, and quite a contrast with Ray Perryman's study.
And then creating the department, growing the watershed department with the city of Austin, and making sure that that's good and strong kind of helps secure and maintain an eye on our environment that, of course, has a benefit for our economy, right? So you guys, I was going to ask a little bit, and you guys, we're getting to a point where we're going to have to start asking you for questions and make sure to answer your questions. But I was going to ask a little bit about the organization of support to use the data, to use the arguments, whether they're the big guns like Lee Walker, the head of Dell, or a guy getting dressed up like Eric Anderson did as in the chicken suit and doing the innovative effort, but to make sure to educate the community. Had there ever been a community-wide organizational effort of this magnitude, to your knowledge, in Austin?
Nothing on the level of that hearing where you had that outpouring of grassroots, just community support, but there had been a long time efforts, but I don't think anything of that magnitude. But you had something like Roberta Crenshaw, that she's the one that had the idea and got the hike and bike trail around Town Lake, and then she went to Lady Bird just as the Johnsons were coming back from Washington after he was president, and got her involved in that. So you had some magnificent accomplishments, and then Ms. Crenshaw went on to be one of the leaders in getting the Barton Creek Trail. And then you had, like, I can't remember who said it earlier, maybe George, the different groups that followed from that, but just nothing on the size of the SOS.
Well, one of the groups, I think you had mentioned they had gotten involved once before. We were having a conversation about this. I think, George, you had mentioned that there were interesting community groups like Esther's Follies got involved. Going out, were you guys all working on trying to identify those unique different communities and getting them engaged in the fight?
Absolutely. For example, the Shiner Beer Distributor Marshall McCone and his wife painted their trucks with Barton Springs. I mean, these are just picture the big beer delivery trucks. And it was all about Barton Springs and the salamanders. And we got 25 cents per case of long neck sold. So yeah, that's just an example. I want to mention one other thing that's not quite to that question, Matt. But we've mentioned Raymond Slade at the U.S. Geological Service a few times, the Watershed Department. A lady who needs to be recognized, still here, PhD PE Lauren Ross, stepped up and did the water quality engineering, worked with Bill Bunch and Brigid and another good attorney on drafting the ordinance. But had we not had Lauren's professional expertise, Lauren's professional expertise was really important, and she was having a hard time finding work. The professional community ostracized her immediately. She was blacklisted. And she's doing well today. But she had the courage to say, not only are y'all right on the science, but here's the engineering on the impervious cover. So I just wanted to give her a shout out.
George, I wanted to add, that reminds me that I agree with you about Lauren's role. But also Barbara Mahler from who was with USGS at the time.
She was on one of the videos that was running.
Oh, good,
earlier.
good. But she was an important scientific figure in that effort too.
At the time of the community debate, because the campaign to pass SOS, it was originally supposed to be on the May ballot, but the city had previously been dominated by real estate and development interests, and then all the ancillary, pieces of that, the title companies, the banks, the builders, and they were able to delay the election. So it really started in August of 1991 when we tried to get the council to pass a strong enough ordinance, and they didn't. And we said, all right, if you won't do it, we will. So we crafted the SOS ordinance and then gathered 42,000 signatures to put it on the ballot. But in the meantime, the powers in the community delayed the election from May to August so that they could file a whole bunch of development applications and then claim they were grandfathered, and that was their plan. But here we were in the community, at community forums and panels and all kinds of presentations. And we were trying to find an engineer, anyone, anywhere, who would, work with us and talk about the validity of the science and the engineering. And we literally couldn't find anyone until Lauren Ross stepped up. And she was finishing her doctoral degree at UT, and they tried to get her kicked out. This is how powerful they were. They went to the university and they tried to get her dissertation advisor to basically kick her out. And her dissertation advisor, to his credit, stood up to them. Because Jim Bob gave a lot of money to UT and had a lot of influence there. So
Doesn't he have a building named after him?
Yeah, he does. While he was still alive, which is against their policy, but they violated it anyway. But there are a number of heroes here, and many of them are in the science and engineering field. And it's important to know what they did and know their names. And Lauren Ross was one of them. And they came after her just like they came after Jeff, and many of us. So the field isn't for the faint of heart. And if you're going to do your job, stick to your guns and stand up for your principles and do what's right. But just know that there may be consequences, which is why getting involved in the political arena is so critical. A lot of people say, I don't like politics, I'm not going to get involved, or my vote doesn't count. Yeah, it does. It makes a huge difference who you elect.
I think, as we are talking about movements that influence communities, I think that we really do have to get back to basics. And I'll just talk about the African American community for a second. In the 1860s, African Americans were Republicans because of Lincoln. simply because of the change that Lincoln made in their lives. People often ask, why did African American people become Democrats? Well, I can tell you, in 1962, John Kennedy federalized the Mississippi National Guard to make sure that James Meredith had an opportunity to go to Ole Miss. In 1963, he did the same thing again at the University of Alabama to remove George Wallace. And then in 1964, LBJ used the FBI to figure out who had killed the civil rights workers in Philadelphia, Mississippi. And there became a belief across the community that these political leaders would protect us against those that might harm us. And I think as we look at how we go forward, the question becomes, who will use their influence to make sure that we are not mistreated, to make sure that we have the opportunity to vote, to make sure that young women make their medical decisions about their own bodies and not old non-white men in Washington. Let me put it like that. What will we do as a community to demonstrate that we will use our influence to make sure that everybody has opportunities? What will we do to make sure that the places where we get training in our schools and after school programs, the places that we get opportunities to jobs at our cities and at our counties, who will use their influence to make sure that opportunity is available? It's something that we can do together, and we must do if we're going to fight the forces that seek to intimidate us today.
I think it was George, you mentioned the 47,000 signatures. I can't remember who mentioned that. Somebody typed up every one of those signatures or typed up the information. Do you remember who that was?
Shooty.
So
well,
Shooty?
Shooty has a list of the all-night speakers, Shooty Fath, the lady I mentioned. But the signatures we turned in to the city clerk's office, well more than enough.
But I remember Shooty having to hand type some
yes.
absurd. So volunteers, getting volunteers to help on something like this, and at the time Shooty had to be 67, 66.
Oh no, way older.
She's 106 now. That was just 30 years ago. So.
Hey, I want to point out, my wife and I went to see Shooty the other day. She's 106. She lives in Westminster. She had a box of files out on the coffee table that she had been working on. And just if I could share an anecdote, so I came in and said, and she has they gave her, I guess, it has like a banner, it says 106 on it from her birthday. It's hanging on the side of the refrigerator. But when we walked in, I said, as I was sitting down, I said, yeah, it's 102 out there. And she thought I was saying, she's very sharp. She thought I was talking about her age, and she had an edge in her voice. She was a little mad. She said, 102? And my wife said, no, he's talking about how hot it is. She said, oh, okay. I said, yeah, I know you're 106.
But getting volunteers, and to Jeff's point, talking about the different communities, we have a Hispanic community as well. What was the outreach to the Hispanic community? Was there one group that really kind of started getting the Hispanic community engaged?
Well, there was an organization that really came together when it was learned, and I have to give credit to Scott Henson and Kathy Mitchell because they did the initial research, that the TCEQ knew that jet fuel tanks in East Austin were leaking jet fuel into the ground, into the groundwater. And in East Austin, the groundwater's kind of close to the surface, and that vast areas were contaminated with some pretty toxic stuff, in people's backyards. And the leader of that community who emerged was Susanna Almanza, and also Ron Davis from the African American community. And we joined forces with them. Susanna formed an organization called Poder, which means power in Spanish. And we joined with them in their pickets outside it was Exxon and all the big oil companies had these tank farms over in East Austin that were leaking, which the companies knew were leaking, and TCEQ knew were leaking. That's where we learned it. They had the evidence, and they did nothing about it. And so we sent volunteers and all kinds of folks to hold picket signs and march with Polaire, and Ron's group was called East Austin Strategy Team. I think they stand out in history as the only community organization which defeated ExxonMobil and forced them to close down their leaking fuel tank farms in East Austin. And that area is now being redeveloped. I was on the council when we oversaw the cleanup, and we insisted that it be a very rigorous cleanup. But they were and continue to be very active and powerful advocates in the Hispanic community. So if you haven't heard of Polaire, look them up. There's a great history and great ongoing work that they're doing today.
Yeah, and we lost Ron, but he preceded Jeff as county commissioner. And after this period Brigid's talking about.
Yeah, he got elected to the county and served for a number of years.
But so that got us into the Hispanic community, brought in more, kind of volunteers, more community support, along with the NAACP and so many different groups that we've talked about today, and the importance of gathering this community support and educating them on the science so that then they could influence the decision makers, because there is that paid advocacy effort from those large organizations that might not be thinking clearly about the science, or it might just be up to no good. I'm going to start taking questions here in just a moment, but what was the start time and the end time, basically, of this period? And what started this entire effort, and when would you say we were kind of wrapping up the last of our votes on the environment, Barton Creek, and the Springs?
Hey, Matt.
Yes, sir.
Matt, one more thing. You mentioned Ron Davis, who I considered a friend and a mentor, and one very proud story that I have is that when Ron decided that he wasn't going to run again, he had a number of people approach me and ask me to consider running. Because he thought that that our team would work to maintain the legacy that we had worked on in putting together the East Austin strategy team. But also there was something that is subtle that has to be remembered here as well. Historically, particularly in deep Southern communities, local groups have been pitted against national groups sometimes. Well, you should work with the East Austin strategy team and not with the NAACP because they aren't from here. But the tank farms was an issue where local activists like Ron and national resources from Ben Chavis at the NAACP had put together the resources, and there was a young lady who works I think at the Sierra Club now. Her name is Leslie Fields. She was my local environmental chairperson at the NAACP at the time, and we made a conscious effort to work with communities, with neighborhood associations, with local churches, so it would not be us against them, but it is all of us together, local and national, aligned based on science. And Ron really worked with us to make sure that we were all moving in the same direction. We all had access to the same information, and we all worked to build a coalition that would be lasting for generations.
Mm-hmm. Exactly. I think probably the start of the effort was really the all-night hearing, and Daryl played a crucial role in that as a reporter at the Austin Chronicle, in that he sounded the alarm and he had to really fight. And you should tell this story, but you had to fight with the publisher and the editor, didn't you, to get the front page that really called the alarm?
Not on that particular one. Actually, that I think it was Robert Bryce brought me this packet from Freeport, and I'm like, dang, this is really huge. But but Lewis Black, who is the editor, who I don't think he would mind me saying, certainly wouldn't dispute the facts on it. Could be pretty cantankerous, but he was sort of like if the didn't exist, the Chronicle would have had to invent him, because he would really get that paper out every week. But no, he immediately, when I took that packet to him and told him the story I was writing, he said, let's put it on the cover. And and it was his idea to do, like back at the time, I don't know how many of y'all ever saw this, but there was a publication called National Lampoon, and they had this, sort of dark cover that had a dog with a gun to its head and said, buy this magazine or we'll shoot this dog. So it was a classic sort of poor taste. They'd probably get canceled now or whatever. But Lewis had the idea to say, let's do that let's do a version of that for the cover. And so then Martha Grennan, the art director at the Chronicle, put just a picture of Barton Springs with nobody in it and a beach ball with a skull and crossbones floating down the springs, and said, read this story or we'll poison Barton Springs. And so no, I didn't get any resistance on that. Oh, you know what? That was on an editorial, but that's probably a story I don't need to go into. I thought that was a fight. You had to get that on the cover. But it was classic, and it was a clarion call. And that, along with people going to Les Amis in the middle of the night and sweeping up all the customers to come down to the council chambers. I mean, as a reporter, I'd worked in a number of places and covered a lot of really big stories, but I was astonished because I was among the literally thousands of people standing outside the city council chambers at that all-night hearing in June of 1990. And I think that was really kind of the spark that organized the movement. And I just remember looking around and thinking, any place that cares this passionately about protecting a spring, I want to make this my home, because I didn't know that I was going to stay in Austin up until that time. And then there were key people who understood the science of elections, who saw this and thought, this is important. There's lots of people showing up here, and close to 1,000 of them signed up to speak. So we have their name and their address and their phone number. We know how to get in touch with them. And that was David Butts and Mark Ishnaga, and then Dean Rindy, who's brilliant at media and messaging, Jeff Smith, who was a brilliant pollster, and that group got together with us, and I'd known them because I'd worked on campaigns to help elect people who were going to do something about the environment, and they really were the ones who helped put together the political frame. I think it was Bunch's idea or somebody's to do the ordinance by citizen initiative, and these guys knew how to run campaigns. So it was that, that kind of combination of forces. But I think it really started at the all-night hearing in June of 1990. And it's still going today. I mean, SOS is still having to fight development efforts along with Save Barton Creek Association because there's still efforts to build developments in the portion of the watershed that Austin doesn't control that would be harmful to the springs. Matt and George and Daryl and many others were involved in bond elections to purchase land in the watershed, including outside the city limits of the city of Austin. And that's a huge part of the community-wide effort to protect the springs. Yeah, I would agree with Brigid. I think it's hard it's hard I don't know if you can put an end date on it. I mean, you can say there was after that, like Brigid got elected, and then 3 years after that, got a majority, because she always didn't necessarily wasn't in the majority on the council all the time, which was difficult. And then we got a majority in 96, and then the next year won all the progressives won all the seats. And so you could say that was a turning point. But I think though that as long as there's a danger to the springs, this goes on. The struggle continues.
It was a trick question. That's what I wanted to hear. The fight goes on. George, do you think it created the modern kind of progressive movement in Austin, the focus on open space, the subsequent bond elections Brigid had mentioned, and so on?
I think it was definitely part of it, but I keep going back to that handful of heroes in the 1970s, including Susan and Jerry Jeff Walker.
Yeah. Yeah,
in my mind, that's when it started, and then it gained enough momentum at the all-night hearing. I think the stakes are higher today. I think the challenges that y'all face in the civic arena and the policy work you do now and in the future in the political world and climate, I'll just say the word and we'll park that conversation, but the stakes are a lot higher now. I think that's become evident.
I'm going to start going to questions. Anybody have one that they've been sitting on? Yes, sir.
And tell us who you are.
Hi, I'm Will Brewer. I'm a PhD student at Baylor. I was just thinking a lot about how Elon Musk and like the whole advent of the tech billionaire thing has kind of changed the conversation about, you know, people with political clout, monetary clout, all of that. They're now like portraying themselves as scientists, sort of, because, I mean, he claims he's the smartest man in the world, right? Donald Trump said similar things, you know, regardless of how you feel about that. How do you guys see our fight, I guess, as geoscientists going forward, like dealing with people who are saying that, you know, they are scientists and they can speak to whatever, like Elon Musk's Hyperloop thing where he wanted to just put a hole in the Edwards Aquifer? It's like, okay, you don't know anything about it, so, but everybody believes he does. So could you kind of comment on that?
Well, I think it raises the stakes for your roles. I mean, really, it was Dr. James Hansen who notified at least the U.S. and the U.S. Congress about the burning of fossil fuels heating up the planet, and that was a huge wake-up call. And I watched from 1988 till present how the fossil fuel lobby, which is extremely powerful and continues to have vast amounts of money, including windfall profits from charging us all ridiculous amounts of money for gasoline, pours money into the denial effort. So I do think that there needs to be scientists who are, you know, willing to speak the truth, and it's speaking truth to power. And so I think your role becomes even more important as we're going to continue to see facts and science twisted and misrepresented. So I do think, especially now with the rise of these tech billionaires, it's going to be an even more important role for you all to fill.
Yeah, I would just add, I mean, Brigid's, I think, on target, but also it's similar, what you describe is similar to Jim Bob Moffett, where he was the richest guy in the world and he just had the biggest gold mine. I'm sorry, he might not have been the richest individual. And so it's important to keep, you know, a strong science element within local governments on up to the federal level, so that because that's really who you would need to listen to rather than Elon Musk. I will say at least he's building electric cars. That's really important for the environment. And he located in East Austin or Travis County, where there's always been demand for more jobs and for industry to locate there. And so, but then of course, as far as I'm afraid, like on his electric cars, he may cancel it out by shooting rockets into space. But
I got to give Jeff credit for helping to bring Tesla to Eastern Travis County.
Absolutely, Matt. If I could, I think that it is going to be important for us, particularly for county commissioners' courts and for city councils, to make sure that the people who are evaluating the plans that are sent in by a Tesla or a Samsung or a whomever, that we have the type of staff, that we've hired the type of staff internally that they have access to externally. We have to make sure that the people that are working for us have the training and bandwidth and access to professional organizations like ICLEI, for example, Brigid, so that when somebody presents us with something, we can either determine that their assumptions are correct and effective, or that they, if they are not, that we reject them. You know, one of the problems that we have at the county is that, you know, a lot of the land that is left to develop, particularly for commercial interests, now lies in Precinct 1 and Precinct 4. And now we have 5 times as many projects proposed to us as we did 5 short years ago. But the staff size that we have has not grown has not grown consistently with the proposals that we're getting. We have tried to take an approach that we saw John Sharp take with the performance review as we've looked at things like, for example, our bond portfolio. We have made sure that the compliance function stays with our staff, but we have augmented our staff in some instances to make sure that when we see the number of permit requests that are increasing, that we can identify things like the number of permits that are requested, the amount of time that it takes to approve or disapprove these proposals that have been made. We've looked at our bond portfolio and built a system that allows us to track everything that's coming in and everything that's coming out. We've got to do a better job with projects that are not in our bond portfolio. We've got to know how much that we need to grow our internal staff, but whether we need to augment that staff in some instances with people with the credentials and experiences of those who are making proposals to us. So we've got to make sure that we grow, right size, and have the capacity internally to answer every request that is made and make a decision that is going to benefit the interest of the community that we serve.
Any other questions?
So I'm still formulating how to answer or how to ask this question, but I think we can all understand the importance of education. How do we combat misinformation? How do you guys find yourself combating misinformation where it's not necessarily a lack of education at all, but it's how people are being educated? How would you guys, on an activism standpoint, combat people who have maybe different information?
I'll take a stab at it. I mean, I think you saw some of what I think has to happen on a grand policy scale. Donald Trump was just an absolute fountain of misinformation. And I think we've got to do a better job of requiring social media companies to hold people accountable when they just lie continually, and their lies hurt people. So I think it was proper for Twitter to cancel Trump's account. I think it was proper for them to cancel Alex Jones' account. And the verdict that just happened yesterday in Austin is just a tiny little measure of the harm that he did and the people that he hurt. But it's difficult, especially with social media. I mean, I was telling somebody that, you know, the old saying about how a lie is halfway around the world before truth gets its pants on is even more true with social media, because things can become viral and spread so quickly. So I just think vigilance and education and outreach by people of good intent. So it's not like you have to wait for, you know, your community leaders to correct the record. If you know something is untrue, I think everybody has a duty to speak up.
Yeah, and I would add that, I mean, this is what I'm going to say is more on a civics level, but yeah, I mean, sometimes you have to just get the word out there and get it out there on as many avenues as possible. And know some people are just going to be spouting information. You have to count on that you reach the majority. But I think, and fundamentally in this country, both to that issue and a lot of the other related issues we have going on, is we need to restore civics education in the schools. I don't think there really may not be one single thing that's more important than that.
George, you've become the king of transit elections, open space, parks, bonds, that sort of thing. I mean, you have to organize these people's thoughts and give them information so they can make decisions. What do you think?
Well, I'm not going to answer that question. You know, I learned a lot.
Well, what do you think? What do you think about how you utilize? How do you educate people to combat misinformation?
I'll give you my narrow-minded advice. It's one of my favorite T-shirts. Never try to teach a pig to sing. It irritates the pig and wastes your time. So I think a good way to go at it is not to debate pigs in public, but to find a different platform to convey the truth.
That's a great quote.
I think that that we need to have a mechanism that allows us to basically establish facts versus opinions. I love the columns that are used in the Statesman and in other papers where they basically make the statement, the political statement that was made, and then they analyze it. We need to make sure that we understand what the facts are, that we have an objective third party. That area historically has been journalism, but we need to make sure that journalism is not just a group of folks who are wealthy and have decided that they can create their own set of facts. So it's just important that we establish places where we can where we're certain that facts are given, and we put that information in the public space where people can get it, and that we don't just believe people because they work better in the electronic medium than we do.
Yeah, I just want to add to what my friend, the commissioner, said, that I think, though, you're still going to have a lot of people, they don't they don't believe the fact check, even no matter how well reasoned it is. So you're still going to have that chunk of folks out there, and just try to build a majority that know the facts.
Do you think we have time for one more question? Or should we
Yeah,
skip
I
it?
think
Okay.
if I
So
have to
we're going to
45.
take your quick question, and then we're going to unfortunately have to let Commissioner Shea go. But I think we can probably all stay for one or two more questions after that. Yes, sir.
Well, thank you. I'm Brian Smith. I'm with the Barton Springs Edwards Aquifer Conservation District. So my question is about something that Brigid said just a few minutes ago, and should say we're sitting here on the recharge zone of the Edwards right now, and yet west of us is a large area. It's called the contributing zone. It's also the Trinity Aquifer, but much of the water coming out in Barton Springs is coming from that area, of the contributing zone, basically west of Austin, and yet. Is there any chance of seeing some sort of ordinances or protection passed for that area that will help protect Barton Springs and that area out there? Because right now the Edwards rules from TCQ don't apply out there, and the SOS ordinance from the City of Austin doesn't apply out there. So there's very limited protections for that area, and yet we know that water is impacting people that live there, and that water's coming our way. So do you have any thoughts on that?
I'll jump on that first. Brigid may be able to be more up to date than me, but I'm afraid the short answer is no, or highly unlikely in Texas. Now, when I was on the city council, I started a regional plan, worked with the Republican Hays County judge. Hays County is the county next to here that includes a large part of the aquifer. And we went into it knowing that what we were doing would have no force of law, but we got all the jurisdictions over the aquifer together and did a regional plan that's still in place. Craig Smith, a longtime activist, he's really tried to keep that alive, still has meetings on it. And some of the jurisdictions passed somewhat stronger water quality regulations, but there still needs to be more, and there have been some efforts in the legislature, but it's going to be really hard to get something like that through the Texas legislature. I would be all for it and would do everything I can to make that happen, but I wouldn't want to sound Pollyannish.
Well, and this does get back to the importance of elections. I mean, I know a lot of people find politics distasteful, but It's a lot worse if you sit it out and let other people make your choices for you. And unfortunately, the Texas legislature has been absolutely hostile to efforts of local communities and local governments to protect water quality, to protect the environment. And you know, so we're captive of them for the time being. But we did, Travis County worked hard to support the creation of the Trinity Groundwater Conservation District. And we helped fund it because the legislature didn't give them the mechanism of raising funds to actually operate, which is kind of classic. But so there's at least a conservation district that can play a role in trying to manage the overpumping of the Trinity, but I don't know how much they can do on water quality. And I know that they're doing a great job with community education and trying to help people understand what's happening to the groundwater levels. But this is an issue I think we're going to see by the end of this summer, that the drought will have such severe impacts on groundwater and on surface water. I was thinking, I think Ben Franklin's quote, "We'll know the value of water when the well runs dry." Thank you all
Thank you so much.
You
And
bet.
we'll take those last questions or two. I think that last point that Brigid was making is so incredibly sound, and you'll find that she does it at every turn, and as does Jeff, George, and Daryl, that it was a huge team of people all working together. And they're all so charitable about making sure to, and you've heard them drop so many names up here today about all the different people who were involved with this effort over time. So I did see another hand. I think it was yours. Yes, yes, ma'am.
I'm probably in the same age range as you folks. So I moved here in the mid-'80s, so I kind of lived through a lot of these experiences that you talk about. And to me, what we have here in Austin is a problem with so many new young people moving in. They don't know a lot of this history, so they don't have this connection to the green spaces and the way Austin used to be. You know, we see the big billboard, it's still Austin, and ironically, it's right where Arts Rib House used to be, or in that vicinity. So I guess my question is, you know, education, but how do we get, I don't even know how you transfer that, I don't know, for lack of a better word, tribal knowledge, or that feeling of, and that historical information of what it took to protect the environment to this new generation of people coming into Austin. Down my street, they're putting 23-story box condominiums, and I fought it on every single section of the site plan all the way, and not one person from the city of Austin ever physically came to that site to look at it. So I guess it's a multifold question, but how do you, with this rampant development, kind of put the brakes on a little bit? How are we going to have a Barton Springs if they're putting a parkway through Oak Hill? That's what, going to be 16, and this is the sensitive area that we're talking about. It is not in the aquifer recharge zone, but it's Barton Creek.
It's in the contributing, I think.
It's in the contributing zone.
Yeah.
So every tree they cut, every inch of concrete that they pave, it's devastating because it's right in my back door. How do we put the brakes on this?
So what if I also heard in there, part of putting the brakes on is how do you get people, new people, young people, people who don't know the story, educated about why this is important, and make sure they're making sound policy input.
Well, and also we have zoning that is from the 80s, so there wasn't even a traffic study pulled for this development. Because it legally, Save Barton Springs attorney, I was talking with them directly, they got involved, but legally they were able to do what they could do because of the way that property was zoned, which was zoning that was written probably like in the early 90s, which has not kept pace with the traffic, the wall of traffic. I don't even know how these people are going to get in and out of their driveway because it's a wall of traffic. You can't even turn on 290 right there. So it's a huge problem. I guess that was my question, was how do you put the brakes on this a little bit so we can protect our environment and keep what we have?
When I got terribly excited about how do you also educate those new people and young people, just because George Cofer designed something at Hill Country Conservancy, and it's got a really neat name.
Yeah, we have emerging professionals in conservation. I'm I'm not saying that that's going to put a brake on development, but we are getting the 20-year-old demographic involved to learn more about public policy, environmental protection. Sydney works at Save Barton Creek Association. More and more conservation groups are recognizing how important it is to have young staff. I'm the outlier on our small nonprofit staff. Our average staff age probably 30. So that is a way. You and I could talk for many hours about how to put the brakes on development, but there's no, and I don't mean to give you a very pessimistic answer, but that freeway is going to get built, and the stupidity of the decisions being made at the Capitol and at TxDOT will come back to haunt us for decades and decades.
Yeah, and I think George is right. I've been encouraged that the groups Save Barton Creek and Save Our Springs Lines too have some young people involved now, because you've got a point. I know we had a thing, the Kent Butler Summit was a great advocate for the aquifer who passed away tragically, and so there's a summit in his honor every year, and I would go and I start thinking, man, we're going to pretty soon have to have this at the senior activity center. But I am heartened to see young people getting involved now. But your more fundamental question is, how is that knowledge and history going to spread out? And that's a challenge. So I would challenge young folks in these organizations to try to figure that out more, because I know I'm not real big on social media. I can write up history and I can do it some more and get it out there, but I'm only skilled to get it so far, frankly. I don't communicate the same way some of these folks do. So we need to tap into that as well. And we need to get them to read a long article too.
We have to build an informal system of making sure that people have access. We operate in a state now where if the lieutenant governor doesn't like something and the speaker of the house doesn't like something, they can say, hey, you can't teach history in school, or these are the things that you can teach and these are the things that you cannot teach. Unfortunately, until we have significant changes at the state legislature, I don't know that there is a lot that we can do formally and officially. But as community people who volunteer and work in organizations, we can work through programs and make sure that our youth have access to information that is important. That is why I think the after-school environment is really so important. That when we are there volunteering, when we're there making sure that the tutors that we have are certified tutors and they have access to our kids, and we are making sure that they have access to the types of information that's going to be helpful to them, that is going to teach them about their environment and where there are opportunities to learn more or to volunteer or to get into summer programs or whatnot. I think we have to take a purposeful approach to make sure that information is available and that opportunities are available for the average kids to learn. I think that a lot of those programs are already available in West Austin, and that's not a bad thing. That's a really good thing. I think that we need to make sure that those programs happen all across the city in the eastern parts as well, because when people know the opportunities that they can grow from or the things that they must protect themselves from, I think they become better advocates over time and can be relied upon to learn, grow, and protect their communities.
Now, you've been so patient about waiting to ask a question. We really appreciate it. I think our answer might be a little bit truncated because I promised that we would get us out at a certain time, but please, go ahead.
Hi, John Dye, grad student at UTSA over in San Antonio. So I had a question about, we started this whole conversation off talking about how pristine and empty the city was 30 years ago, basically. and San Antonio sort of had the same problem with the city expanding and destroying all of the nature in the area. Even around the university itself, there used to be massive forests that were just hectares and hectares, and they've just been torn down, and they're building up apartments and everything around it. But we also, in the city of San Antonio, well, not in the city, but in Bexar County, have a Government Canyon State Natural Area, which is a massive state park that was set aside decades ago and is just going to be there in perpetuity and has dinosaur tracks and all this great natural wonders. Is there any reason, or has there been any effort to have done that in the areas north and west of the city of Austin? Because there's even now still some pristine tracts of land that are out there that are prime territory for a state park like that. So,
well, I don't know about, I'm not sure the city of Austin or the Travis County is going to get a park from the state. I would be skeptical on that, but the city of Austin, in coordination with groups like Georgia's Hill Country Conservancy, has bought a lot of land starting in the 70s, then more in the 90s. The whole Barton Creek Greenbelt goes, was it 7 miles upstream? And then we bought, starting in the 90s, bought a bunch of land concentrating on the area beyond Austin's jurisdiction, out in the Barton Springs area, Hayes, and different other parts of Hayes County and Travis County, that bought critical, I think over 15,000 acres. And so those are just managed for water quality control and sometimes endangered species by the Austin Water Utility, the City of Austin's water utility. But yeah, I think there definitely needs to be another push to do that. I mean, you know, from what you just described, that's going on out in these areas too, just one subdivision after another. There's a bunch of subdivisions that would have happened if not for this. But yeah, there definitely needs to be more land purchases. That's what really needs to happen, because back to Brian's, I mean, the Barton Springs Everest Aquifer District is just a great organization to work with, but they weren't given the powers when they were created for water quality. And so you really need to buy the land.
The public access is limited on the Balcones Canyonlands plans, but the same day that the SOS ordinance passed, August 8, 1992, the voters approved $22 million to start purchasing the 30,000 acres known as the Balcones Canyonlands plan. Commissioner Travillion and City of Austin, Travis, and City continue to add to that. Some of the people who created Government Canyon are working to expand Enchanted Rock State Natural Area. My point there really is, in my opinion, you've got to pick something to do and do it well. So I would love one of the outgrowths of this gathering today, I'm being serious, 25 years from now, some of you are going to be creating those future public spaces. We're starting now, and it takes decades of work. So I encourage you to follow that vision you see.
Amen. Just one more sentence on that. Another challenge we're facing, you have to deal with as y'all go about that, is that Texas has one of the lowest amounts of public land of any of the states in the union, having to do with how they came into the union.
How big is BCCP?
28,000 and the goal of 30,000.
You know, the comments made about you all will be doing that in the future. The concept of BCCP, the Balcones Canyonland Conservation Plan.
Right.
That only started 30 years ago?
Yeah.
So 30 years ago, a small number of people came up with that concept, and you'll be doing the same thing.
And just to clarify, and so that's right, and most of that is and you said the Northwest, so that's Northwest. The reason I use the 15,000 plus figure is that's the amount over the Barton Springs zone of the aquifer. So you can add those two together for the amount of open space.
Well, so we promised you we would get you guys done in a very specific time. I want to thank Commissioner Jeff Travillion. You know, one of the things that I think Jeff drove home so eloquently is that knowledge and that importance of understanding what was quoted so long ago as environmental racism, and that legacy of environmental racism and how that applies to environmental policy and our need to constantly be conscientious of that. Jeff, thanks so much for joining us.
Just wanted to piggyback on something that you all just said about acquiring and making sure that we conserve that we conserve as much land as we can. That's not just the Northwest anymore. As you know, Travis County has reached out from Pflugerville across Maynard to make sure that we are building access to not only access to space there, but creating open spaces for biking, creating a direct path from Pflugerville all the way into Austin on your bike. We also have a very real and important interest in making sure that that the significant amount of parkland that it has been purchased for decades in the Eastern Crescent, that all of the folks in the Eastern Crescent have access to it, learn how to preserve it and use it in a way that will allow it to remain pristine and serve generations of folks that are moving out into that area. The county has been purchasing property or purchasing easements on a lot of property so that we are connected all the way through Eastern Travis County, and that we all have access to those resources.
That's absolutely right. George, people can join the Hill Country Conservancy. Young people can join Emerging Professionals in Conservation, which is a project within Hill Country Conservancy.
Yes.
Do you have any projects coming up you'd just like to drop to the group really quickly?
We do. If you want to volunteer, we need scientists, artists, communicators, and we're building a trail called the Violet Crown Trail, and we'll have work days, and so you can find out about all those good things at hillcountryconservancy.org. And thank you, Matt, for letting me give that plug for conservation. We're the real estate company for Mother Earth.
I love that. That's great. I've never heard that before. The Violet Crown Trail is one of the most remarkable projects. I think you could take it and apply that project to take that concept to other communities around the state and around the country. Daryl Slusher, tell us the name of the news outlet again.
AustinIndependent.org.
And you're back up online
TheAustinIndependent.org.
TheAustinIndependent.org. And if it was his great journalism that helped really strike this movement and this effort and uncover the tragedy that was looming, about to occur in Austin, and then stop it in its tracks, I think probably following TheAustinIndependent.org would be a great thing to do for those of you who are here, or if you'd like to follow news from wherever you are in the rest of the state. And then, of course, Brigid Shea has done just such a remarkable work for the environment for so long and continues to do it in her role with the county. So I'd like to thank everyone here and leave you with one quick thought that we covered early on, how important this is, and the comment Lee Walker had made about how important the environment is for the economy. I didn't mention this tidbit earlier as well, and I think we heard this often in our roles at City Hall. I can't imagine that I ever heard of one employer that ever moved to the city of Austin that didn't say the reason they wanted to be here was because of our environment and our natural beauty and our natural wonder. So it does benefit the economy, and it certainly has shown to be true. Thanks, Jeff Travillion. Thanks, George Cofer. Thanks, Daryl Slusher. And thanks, Brigid Shea. Thank you all. We really appreciate you.
Thanks, guys.
Thank you, guys. My name is Matt Curtis, and I failed to mention, thank you, Rhea, for volunteering in the back. Thank you, Sydney, for Barton Creek, Save Barton Creek Association. And thank you, Clark. Thank you, everybody, for putting this on. We really appreciate you guys. We appreciate the volunteers and all the workers on this. Thanks.
We're going to go over to Roger in just a minute, but one thing I'd like to point out. I want to thank everybody on the panel today for coming up and sharing their stories. Because what we see in the stories is individuals with ideas, following up on those ideas, finding other folks to work together. It doesn't start with a big flood. It starts with a trickle. It starts with finding others to work together, finding something that you're interested in, asking the question why. Why is this place like this? And that goes back to geology itself. Every force on this planet leaves its mark. A lot of it's written in the stones. A lot of what we do is written in what happens in the future. The SOS amendment was put together 30 years ago. It affected how development has happened. How what's going to happen 30 years down the line is going to be a direct result of what we are starting to do now. And that means each one of you deciding what it is that you want to work with. That means each one of you getting outside and connecting with the natural world and helping others connect with the natural world, so at least you have a common language to talk from, the language of experience. It all comes down to how you wish to dedicate your work. Speaking for SBCA, one of the things that we are striving to do is to find ways to not just educate people, bring kids, but actually create careers where people can actually participate in monitoring the environment, in studying the environment, in defining the problems that have to be solved. Engineers solve problems. Scientists define those problems. So it's up to you guys. It's up to all of us to find those resources together. And we will have a better future. It's not just us. It's also the people that aren't even born yet. And we have to trust that they will take what we are building and make good decisions from there. I want to thank you all very much for your patience today, and please stay active, participate, be part of your community, not just your laboratory, but your community.
Austin is a summer city and Barton Springs eternal. Winter's short and the springs are pretty. Barton Springs eternal. And when it's warm, where do we go to remove most all our clothes? The clearest, cleanest swimming hole is Barton Springs eternal.
The bank may have turned down your loan, but Barton Springs eternal. Your boss won't let you off the phone, but Barton Springs eternal. It's been a work day to forget. It's time for you to go get wet. You'll be feeling better, you bet. Barton Springs eternal.
It may be dry on Barton Creek, but Barton Springs eternal.
May not have rained in many weeks, but Barton Springs eternal.
And if it's warm or if it's freeze,
It's always 68 degrees.
in a world of uncertainties, it's Barton Springs eternal.
They may abstain at City Hall, but Barton Springs eternal. Justice moving at a crawl, but Barton Springs eternal.
East Austin, I'd say tanks a lot. Rulers breaking rules a lot. It looks like some impervious plot on Barton Springs eternal.
Indians, they used to come. Barton Springs eternal.
Feel the chill, feel the sun.
Barton Springs eternal.
And as they filled their water sacks, to them it was a sacred act. What would they say if they came back to
Barton Springs eternal.
We interrupt this program for a message from the Greater Tennessee Humane Society. Why do people worry so about Barton Springs Eternal? Holler out, look out below! Barton Springs Eternal. It's a little twist on down and up when your aquifer's an aqueduct. What goes down then comes up. Barton Springs Eternal.
How many times we read and weep, Barton Springs eternal. Watch development as it creeps up, Barton Springs eternal.
The
This piecemeal progress and grand demise has been mauled, engulfed, and condoized. We don't want no consolation prize. We want Barton